I've been really on my own when I think about it. Yeah, my house is not a home when I think about it. I've been feeling so alone when I think about it. Yeah, nobody really got me when I think about it. I'm really on my own when I think about it.
What is good, YouTube fam? It's your boy Simba coming back here again with another reaction video for you guys today. For today's reaction video, we got the shocking love life of Glenn Quagmire. Let's jump up in it.
Glenn Quagmire has been prominently portrayed as a man only interested in sexual conquest. Usually when he's on screen, he's seen trying any method possible to get a woman into his bed. Though of course, going by Quagmire's festival he hosted as well as a few other clips, Quagmire didn't consider women to be his only conquests. But while he has made it clear how important he considers sex, what about love and romance? Before we get too far into it, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The first time Quagmire was shown to be a partner beyond the bedsheets was in episode 21 of season 4, I Take Thee Quagmire. Upon meeting the maid that was temporarily employed by the Griffins, Glenn became enamored and didn't waste any time asking her out. The brief romance was followed by Glenn proposing, much to his friend's surprise. Following this, Glenn changed his behavior to the point where he was almost unrecognizable. He didn't show any interest in looking at other women to any capacity and spent his time instead looking into interior decorating and spending time with Joan. It wasn't until Peter used Lois's swollen chest to get Quagmire to realize he wasn't ready to settle down. The next time was in the following season when Quagmire had an affair with Cleveland's wife. The incident was short-lived, with it implied that Loretta only wanted something brief as a break from Cleveland's more subdued nature. While Glenn could be demonized for this episode, we have to give him some credit for his guilt, leading to him to desperately trying to make things right between him and Cleveland. Loretta had been the one in a committed relationship and had been the one to push for things to go further between her and Quagmire, so it was easy to place far more blame on her. What was worse was, unlike Glenn, she had no guilt over what happened and instead used the fact that she slept with someone else as an excuse to berate Cleveland. Later on in episode 15's Meet the Quagmires, Peter had messed up the timeline when he was disappointed in how he devoted all of his younger years to winning over Lois. After going back in time with the help of death, Peter and Brian returned to a timeline where Lois ended up marrying Glenn. In these scenes, Quagmire's behavior didn't change past the fact that he was married. Unlike with Joan, Quagmire had stayed the sex-obsessed guy he had been before, but now he was focusing all of his attention on—
bro, that's creepy. That's creepy as hell seeing that.
he had been before, but now he was focusing all of his attention on one woman instead of multiple. One could actually argue that Glenn and Lois made a decent couple, as she encouraged him to be as physical as he wanted to be, so as long as it was just between the two of them. In season 8's episode, Jerome is the New Black, we gained even more insight as to why Quagmire behaved as he did towards women. In an effort to force a friendship between them, Brian had sent a note pretending to be an ex-girlfriend in order to trick Glenn into a night on the town. After Brian revealed that he was the one behind the note, Glenn began expressing how the idea of seeing Cheryl again had risen his hopes too much, as she was the one who got away and was the woman he considered to be his one chance at true love. Damn. As the realization set in that Cheryl wasn't showing up, Glenn was seen crumbling into tears and spent the rest of the evening very cold and distant towards Brian, leading towards him lashing out in a memorable speech. This brief mention of Cheryl Tiegs would be a focus on the episode Tiegs for Two. When Brian failed to get the attention of Denise using the tactics Glenn taught him, Quagmire didn't show any sympathy, quickly ridiculing Brian for thinking methods to get laid would also work in finding true love. In this scene, Glenn once again mentioned how he saw very few people as capable of achieving true love because finding the perfect partner was nearly impossible, with him giving the example of Cheryl being his perfect match. After hearing this detail, Brian had decided to get revenge on Glenn by finding Cheryl and flaunting their relationship before Glenn. When Quagmire retaliated by using Jillian to make Brian jealous, things escalated to the point that both women stormed out of the date. As the dust settled, Quagmire stated he was well aware that his actions didn't make him any better than Brian, and that things with Cheryl were officially blown thanks to his choices, implying that Cheryl would not be making a return as a love interest. In season 10's Meg and Quagmire, Glenn had decided to use Meg turning 18 as a chance to initiate a relationship between them. Though Peter had begged for Glenn not to, Quagmire disregarded his friend's concern and stated it was just something he felt he had to do since Meg was of age and so close. This was a very bittersweet episode. On the one hand, Meg was old enough to make her own choices and Quagmire had long since been painted as selfish when it came to him trying to get laid. It wasn't unexpected for Quagmire to try and win over Meg's affection in order to add her name to his list of partners. The thing that was upsetting was that it made his previous interactions towards Meg even more creepy and off-putting, especially in moments such as when Glenn and Meg had their heart-to-heart at the end of Barely Legal. We do want to give some credit to how this arc caused Glenn and Meg to see each other afterward. As the series progressed, Quagmire and Meg were seen to be friendly towards one another, and not typically in an inappropriate sense as one would expect. Quagmire began actually calling out Peter's indifference to Meg, telling him just to talk to his daughter rather than make Glenn circle the block a dozen times. He helped Meg to get a job and helped her to train to face mental Mike. So whilst this episode of them romantically involved could be off-putting in many ways, it oddly worked out for the progression of the series. The next season introduced Charmise in The Giggity Wife, where after waking up from a bender, Glenn found himself married to a prostitute. This was again a very conflicting episode to see Glenn in. He was clearly not interested in Charmise and only stayed with her not to lose his possessions and property in the process of a divorce. Quagmire had even made the extreme decision to ask Peter to sleep with him in order to convince Charmise he was gay and get her to leave him willingly. This was an interesting setup to see Glenn in. With Charmise being a prostitute, Glenn didn't have to worry about radically changing his behavior as he had with Joan. But he also didn't have the sexually charged relationship he was shown to have with Lois in the alternate timeline, as he wasn't physically attracted to Charmise. Instead, we were greeted with an odd dynamic where Glenn was friendly with Charmise and did his best to be a decent partner, taking her to the doctor and giving her money to make a new wardrobe for herself. When the two parted ways, it wasn't in bad blood, but with the two of them agreeing that a marriage simply wouldn't work. In episode 3 of season 12, Glenn met Sonja, and the two shared a bond that was heavily influenced by their need to push each other's boundaries. As Quagmire had been shown in the series to use drugs on his own dates, he didn't see anything wrong when Sonja did the same to him, thereby causing him to ignore a major red flag. This snowballed into Sonja pushing further and further and Quagmire finding himself in a position where he couldn't get her to back off. He had been unable to set boundaries properly as they had progressed, and so, when everything hit the fan, Glenn wasn't able to get Sonja to take his fear and need for space seriously. In season 14, Peter was faced with the fact that Glenn had fallen for Lois in the episode Hot Pocket Dial. While many would argue that Peter overreacted to Glenn being attracted to Lois since Quagmire wasn't trying anything, we have to once again mention the alternate timeline. Peter had already dealt with a reality in which Glenn took Lois from him, so it wasn't too shocking that Peter would create a wedge between them over the pocket dial. This would also help push why Peter was so elated seeing Glenn fall for another woman in the Korean drama Quagmire starred in, Winter Summer. When the boys all went to Korea and ran into Glenn's old co-star, Han-si, Peter, Joe and Cleveland all fanboyed over the fact that they had been an item both on the show and in real life. However, that joy didn't last when Han-si had nearly convinced Glenn to stay in Korea with her and her family. It wouldn't be until a few seasons later that Glenn was given another chance as a serious relationship when he met Carrie. Though fans were well aware Glenn hated dogs, he lied about liking them in order to keep dating Carrie, even asking Brian to be his pet. The failure of this relationship could be blamed on Brian as much as Quagmire. Though Glenn should have told the truth in the first place, Brian was the one that put pressure on Carrie and Glenn to get married, tricking Carrie into thinking Glenn wanted them to move in and be committed to one another. In the end, Glenn had lashed out and revealed what he really thought of how things developed between him and Carrie, effectively ending the relationship. Later on, Glenn's interest in Lois was brought up once again when Lois asked Glenn to pose as her husband for a reunion. Both Lois and the viewers expected Glenn to use the chance to make some sort of move. Considering how characters like Brian were aggressive in trying to win women over and Quagmire's past tactics, it was a little surprising to see Glenn honor Lois's boundaries. Rather than making a move, Glenn slept with the cocktail waitress and explained his distance from Lois was to respect both her and Peter. It's been interesting to see how Glenn has changed over the years. In many ways, he's still the same sex-crazed man that we know at the beginning. In other ways, Glenn has shown a lot of maturity in how he sees the women closest to him. Without a doubt, Glenn's behavior has changed not only because of his friendship with women, but his experience in being a father, no matter how short-lived those times were. It'll be fascinating to see how Glenn develops over future seasons. Hopefully he'll gain more maturity and insight, making him a more interesting character to watch. What do you think of Glenn Quagmire? Does he need a permanent...
He's the GOAT. Giggity. I love Quagmire, man. He's always been funny to me. If you guys like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button for me. Thank you guys for commenting, sharing, and subscribing. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.